Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar for this year of the UPS and Startup Canada Women Exporters Program. My name is Nadia. I'm the program lead for the Women's Exporter Program, as well as the Program Marketing Officer here at Startup Canada. Now, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I am on today is located on the unceded territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples, and I encourage each of you to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are residing on today as well. Today's session is being recorded, and it will be shared afterwards on YouTube in case you miss anything or you want to rewatch any of our other webinars and sessions as well. We invite each of you to introduce yourself in the chat and connect with one another. I know that's one of the best parts of our webinars. Feel free to share your name, your organization, where you're calling in from today, and even a link to your LinkedIn if you want to connect with the other participants. Make sure that you're sending the message to everyone in the room, because I know Zoom defaults to only sending it to the hosts and the panelists, and we want to be able to connect with everyone. Now, a bit about Startup Canada. Startup Canada is a national nonprofit that is the gateway to Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're here to connect entrepreneurs with the support, community, and tools that they need to grow and build a successful business in Canada. Since launching in 2012, we've actually grown to support more than 130,000 entrepreneurs annually and an ever-growing grassroots community network from coast to coast to coast. In partnership with UPS, this program specifically is the Women Exporters Program, and it's a global initiative that is designed to help bridge the gender gap in education and export participation by providing targeted assistance to women-owned small and medium-sized businesses. Today's webinar in particular is about why you should consider exporting in your products and businesses. We're going to highlight some of the benefits of exporting and also discuss some of the challenges and potential risks as well. We'll start with the presentation prepared from UPS, followed by a panel of amazing guest speakers that I know you're going to learn to know and love throughout this session. We have some prepared questions for them, but we also want to hear from each and every one of you. These sessions are designed to help you as much as possible. So as we're going through the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to drop it into the chat or to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer those questions as well. Now, without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to our first guest speaker for today, which is Paul Gaspard, the Director of Small Business at UPS Canada and a longstanding partner of Startup Canada.
Thank you, Nadia. Appreciate it. And thank you for everyone that's watching live and anyone that's going to watch afterwards. Now, before I go through my script and the slides I have, I actually got a quick story I'd like to share with everyone, something that I actually heard yesterday that I think really resonates as to why organizations like UPS work with organizations like Startup Canada to support diverse organizations like women-led businesses and the importance behind that. I was very fortunate yesterday. I was actually in Ottawa attending an event that was sponsored by Startup Canada at the US Ambassador's Residence. And it was a pitch competition for diverse businesses. There were 10 businesses there pitching to win some seed money. And it was a great event, great night. But one of the things that really resonated with me was afterwards, there was a speech by the Ambassador Cohen. And in his speech, he brought up a story where he had an opportunity to meet a business a little while back and talk to the business owner, which was a women-led business, and talking to the owner, the founder. She explained that unfortunately, because some of the challenges and things that they face being a diverse business, that when it came to actually pitching her business and trying to raise money, her partner, who is a white male, who's in the business, she would always have him actually do the pitching because it turned out that they would be or have greater success in actually getting the funding that they wanted, which was very hard to hear when he mentioned this story, shared a story with us yesterday. But it made me realize that as I was getting prepared for today's session, why it's important for organizations like UPS and support organizations like Startup to continue to tear down some of these barriers and to help as much as we can, all diverse businesses, but not just women-led businesses as well. So just wanted to share that with everyone because I thought it really resonated and was important to get us kicking off our second year of the Women's Exporters Program. Now, today, it's more practical than ever to sell goods and services across the globe. And most of the world's potential consumers are outside of Canada. We know that, right? And many of the Canadian exporters continue to boost their bottom line and build their competitiveness by selling to the world markets. Thanks to the internet, improved logistic channels, free trade agreements, which is great if you're a Canadian business, e-commerce, and of course, an array of other available export assistance through the Canadian government and its partners. Exporting is more achievable than ever before. We know that. So why should Canadian businesses in general export? And there's specific reasons why, and shortly you'll hear from more of this from our great panel that we have. But for now, let me share some of these benefits of exporting that we see and have heard from some of our customers. So as we dive into the first slide, the Canadian women-led businesses, like all businesses, can benefit from exporting. And here are just 6, and there's a lot more, but I thought that these 6 generic reasons were ones that were, important for us to highlight when you're a women-led specific business trying to go global. And then I'm going to add a 7th one afterwards that I think is very specific to women-led businesses and why you should consider going into international markets. So you see on here, we've got market expansion, right? So exporting allows women-led businesses to access larger and more diverse markets beyond Canada, which can lead to increased sales and growth opportunities. Global reach is another one. So exporting can provide your businesses with a global presence, enhancing both your brand as well as your reputation as you start going to an international scale. There's a competitive advantage to having your business go global, right? Many businesses in foreign markets are actively seeking diversity and inclusion in their supply chains. And being a women-led business, that can be a unique selling point, giving you that competitive advantage in some of these markets. Networking and partnerships. We hear this all the time, right? So I've gone global. That now makes me have to develop relationships with international partners, distributors, even customers. And this obviously leads to valuable networking opportunities and strategic partnerships that help develop and grow your business even more. There is government support. There's support for your business in general, but the Canadian government offers various programs and initiatives that are specifically supporting women entrepreneurs in their exporting efforts and providing financial assistance, mentorship, and access to all these resources is critical. And then there's job creation, right? So expanding into international markets can lead to job creation, benefiting not only you as a business owner, but also other employees and the local community as you hire more and grow your business. Now, if we jump to the next slide, you'll see here that there's one more benefit that I think is important to share, and that's the impact on the women's economic empowerment. Women-led businesses that export can contribute to a broader goal of the women's economic empowerment. And I see that. I talk to a lot of women businesses that have been able to punch through that higher barrier and go global and grow their business, and they're mentors. They help other women-led businesses. And with the combined effort, we can hopefully close the gender gaps that we see out there, both with entrepreneurship and leadership positions by inspiring and empowering other women to pursue entrepreneurship or even leadership roles that can help women-led businesses grow and prosper. Now, if we move to the next slide, it is important for us to note that exporting also does come with challenges, right? If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. But it's important to know that these barriers can all be overcome with support and help. And these, of course, include navigating trade barriers, right? So understanding how to go to these markets and how to move your goods globally. But there's support with that. Understanding foreign regulations, right? So the Trade Commission Services, Export Development Canada, are two excellent government-run organizations that can help you understand foreign regulations, but then also your logistics providers, right? Company like UPS Canada, that is a leader in the brokerage operations, we know how to move goods globally to over 200 countries, and we can help you answer those questions and make sure you do that right. Managing cultural and market differences, dealing with logistics, obviously with a good partner that can help, and then securing financing and insurance to move your goods global, right? All very important and things that you need to consider as challenges, but all of them can be overcome. But it's also important to note that women-led businesses may face unique challenges when exporting. And such one of them is breaking into male-dominated industries and dealing with gender biases, right? I shared a story earlier on, right? So it's unfortunate to hear that, a women-led business feels like they need to have a male pitch their business in order to raise funding. These are barriers, gender bias barriers that we need to overcome, not just within our own borders, but obviously globally as we continue to help women-led businesses go beyond our borders. Now, however, excuse me, with the right support, resources, and strategies, women-led businesses can overcome all of these challenges and thrive in international markets. And I feel privileged because I work with and talk to a lot of these businesses. In fact, one of the ones pitching yesterday is a business that is global and thriving and doing well. And I'm very happy to call them a customer of ours, and that's Delcini Stainless. And Anita has done a great job of growing her business outside of our borders. And she's a great mentor for a lot of startup businesses as well. Organizations and government agencies often offer specialized assistance, as I already alluded to, in programs to help women-led businesses succeed in exporting. And that is our goal with this program, the Women's Exporter Program. Starting with this first session, we want to start a dialogue. Our goal is not just to present slides. It's not about me being up here. In fact, I want to get through these as quickly as I can, because our goal is to ensure that we provide women-led businesses the opportunity to share their experiences, provide their advice, along with UPS Canada and Startup Canada and many of our partners. We want to help you succeed in exporting. So let's get through these last few slides quickly as we go to the next one. So how does small businesses contribute to Canada's exports? What's the big deal, right? Well, as you can see on the slide, Stats Canada's most recent key small business statistics, which is from 2022, shows that Canada's exports of goods totals 718 billion in value. That's huge. Almost 20% of that, 18.8%, comes from small businesses. So small businesses have 135 billion in exports of goods today and growing. When we look at from establishments, there's over 59,000 Canadian businesses that export today, and the vast majority of them are small businesses, almost 90%, right? So that's great information. And when we go to the next slide, we'll see again that Stats Canada's report show that the main export destinations, and of course, at the top of the list, I don't think it's a surprise to any of us, it's the US. But you can see what follows, right? China is second, and the UK is third. And what's actually very interesting is just in 1 year from 21 to 22, India has taken a large jump from 14th to 9th position. So this is great information to know, right? But none of this is important without research. And you'll hear this from your mentors and maybe from some of the panelists today, that one of the key messages or key things that you should definitely do is research. The importance of research, I can keep saying it over and over. Knowing your market, knowing your customers, and knowing your product is critical. And let me share you a quick example of that. I was very fortunate to work with an entrepreneur, a very young entrepreneur, several years ago, that was introducing a new line of sandals for women, so shoes. It was in the shoe industry. And the shoes were being manufactured in China, and they were importing the sandals. Now, when they were importing the samples, they recognized what the import fees were, what the duties and taxes. were based on the sandals. But they made a slight change to one of the models, but that change was significant enough that the harmonized code, therefore the duties and taxes, changed. And it changed significantly. It went from about 6% to almost 14%. Think about that from your margin and from your business, where you're expecting X cost, in this case 6%, and then you're told tomorrow as you go to market, it's actually 16%. That could impact your business greatly to a point that it can actually put you even out of business, depending on how big of the impact that is. But that is because it was imported from China. We know with a lot of changes recently that there's this new catchphrase of nearshoring, where a lot of businesses now are having their products manufactured in Mexico. And in Mexico, we have CUSMA, right? Our agreement with the US and with Mexico that helps with a lot of trade. So understanding where you want to go to and where you want to source your products, and knowing your customers and knowing where you're moving to is critical. And all of that comes from research, and all that comes with help that you can get from a lot of the experts that we'll have on our sessions here and with people that you'll work with. If we go to the next slide, this is data that I found recently on a report from the WEKH, so the Women Entrepreneurs Knowledge Hub. Now, what you see on the screen is that in less than 10 years, women-led businesses' propensity to export, right? So this is businesses and their propensity to export has gone from half of where men-led businesses were to almost being at par. And this is data that is already 7 years old. So this is great news. What we're starting to see is we're starting to see that barriers are coming down, that women-led businesses are prospering, they're growing, they're going global, and they're starting to be successful. And that's what we want to see. That is what we want to hear. Now, as I go to my final slide, what I want to share with you here is results from a UPS conducted research on international consumers. And we've done this for many years. And during one of our most recent studies, we asked shoppers that bought from international retailers, what some of their thoughts were, right? So, and what you see here on the screen are responses specifically from buyers in China, Mexico, and in the UK. Now, overall, consumers look outside of their own markets for products that they can't source locally or from brands that is recognized internationally, right? So that's at the top. However, when you look at China, their top 2 reasons is the need for a higher quality product or to ensure the product authenticity. And what is one of the things that Canada is known for around the world? It's our quality and authenticity are both top of the list, right? So made in Canada is something that is important, not just within our market, but obviously globally. So knowing that you've got people in other markets that would consider buying from you because you're a Canadian business is huge and will definitely help you understanding that when you want to start going global. So knowing your target markets, what the local shoppers expect is a good start. And we'll start sharing a lot more of this as we progress through the program. But now, enough of me talking. I want to turn the screen back to Nadia and, of course, our great panelists.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing all of your insights. I think that was a really great way to kick off the session and to provide some context to all of our attendees. And it creates a great introduction to our panelists. So now we're going to kick off our panel. We have an amazing lineup of guest speakers today, starting with Megan, who is the G20 Young Entrepreneur Alliance Sherpa for Canada, and she also is in charge of government relations at Futurepreneur. We have Beatrice, the co-host of Find a Way podcast, Miriam, the CEO at Global Startups Accelerator, and Vanessa, the Trade Commissioner and Youth Champion at the Ontario Regional Office of the Trade Commissioner Service. Thank you all for joining us today and for sharing your insights. I know everyone's really excited to hear from you and to learn from you. We're going to kick off by understanding some of the key advantages for a startup going to export. I know Paul touched on some in his presentation, but I also want to hear from some of you based on your experiences and also know if there's any success stories that you've seen in your role and your experiences. So I'll start with Megan, if you want to touch on any advantages and any success stories.
For sure. Thanks, Nadia. And it's really great to be here. I think Paul touched on a lot of different advantages for sure. One thing that I would add, and that's from the perspective of some of our great participants in inclusive trade missions, such as the G20 Young Entrepreneurs Alliance, is also the fact that as you export, you also identify more and more your comparative advantage and your competitive advantage as well. But more than that, there's also the fact that it would open doors for perhaps some innovation in your product, right, or your service. You're identifying additional gaps or needs in different markets. You might take that back into your local market and figure that, oh, this might be an opportunity for me to elevate. Perhaps it's the user experience, perhaps it's the social or sustainable impact of your product or the strategies that you have in addressing some of the needs of your clients. Some of the examples, there's so many, and I think you know some of them as well, Nadia, just having participated on the delegation for the G20YA, but we've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who perhaps had a sense of export readiness, and they were ready to export their product or their service, right? Because there's product and service as well. But one example that comes to mind for me is we have an entrepreneur who was focused on circular economy strategies. And looking at the waste that exists in oceans with fishing gear. And so her product slash service in this sense was to really create those partnerships to be able to recuperate a lot of this waste in oceans and then being able to ultimately transform it with partners into viable products. So in textiles or recycled materials. And as participating into a trade mission that focused on, say, the Indian market, she was able to identify that some of the needs that she was seeing, say, in Nova Scotia, Canada, which we actually have a lot of fishing waste in oceans, were very similar to the context in India, except she was able to identify local partners to enable some of these fishing expeditions to ensure that this model could also be reutilized in the Canadian context as well. So this is one example. There's many of them. But just in terms of identifying some of those clients, some of those partners on the ground, and the benefits that it can bring back to your products and service at home.
I love that. And I love that piece around the innovation too, of understanding, how you can improve your product in other markets. And maybe that even results in more improvements and more sales in your local market. I think that's a really great point. Miriam, I wanted to see if there was any advantages you wanted to touch on or any success stories you've seen in your role as well.
Yeah, no, and very similar to the last story. I guess back in 2010, I was working for a technology company in Vancouver, and the technology company they used to have big equipment that's required to do LiDAR. For those that are unfamiliar with LiDAR, these equipments are pretty big. They are put sometimes in airplanes or helicopters to actually collect laser from the ground so they can create different type of models for infrastructure. And as you can imagine, that type of technology and the type of equipment cannot be exported all the time because it requires very specific, importation and exportation rules. And, the company at the time was just working in Canada, US market. And they were using about 3 or 4 equipments in between the two countries. And, LiDAR has one thing, and is that, you can use those equipments just when it's sunny, and you don't have too many clouds, or you don't have water in the surface because otherwise it cannot be collected well. And then, for 6 months or 5 months of the year, they were not able to work really because in Canada, with the winter time, it was not just possible to do those type of work. And in the US, in many parts of the US, they could, but, most of the places they were working were kind of like, north of the US, and, they have a different type of other projects, but it was just difficult. Having said that, the company was just working almost for 6 months of the year, kind of actively working, and the other 6 months they were kind of passively, working kind of at the office. They figured out over the time, that they have a huge market in Latin America, where, weather conditions are opposite than North America. When we are here in winter, over there is summer, and basically vice versa. So they took a full advantage of that, and they started to export the equipment just, in a temporary basis to Latin America to perform some projects. And I cannot tell you, after that, they were having just full jobs all the year on, having part of the team actually traveling to Latin America to perform those projects in winter time. Those lucky guys were having summer all year because they was here, and then in Latin America there. But I was actually at that time the person in charge to help them to export the equipment in a temporary basis. So I know how difficult it could be, and I know like UPS an excellent work in helping those type of companies to go in those bringing those equipments there. But it was certainly a good example of how and when you can export to other places, where you are basically putting innovation in other places. Canadian companies have a huge advantage, normally are very well received in many emerging markets because the Canadian brand is super strong. And basically this company was putting way more revenue and made way more work during the year, just because of this type of exportation they were doing and finding new markets. So yeah, that was kind of a very successful story that I always keep in my mind when I'm sharing this, about innovation and exporting.
I love that. That's such a good story, because I think I know a lot of times as entrepreneurs, you're testing and learning and you're iterating on your solution. And maybe sometimes you feel like, oh, it's not working, or maybe you feel defeated. But kind of in the story you shared, it might not be that the product or solution, anything's wrong with it. Maybe it's just the wrong target market or the wrong demographics. So I really like that story that, maybe it's not actually your product. Maybe it's just you have to reach into a new market and they can help you to grow your business and to be successful. I know we just talked about some of the advantages and some of the benefits, but we want to talk about some of the challenges. I know Paul did touch on some in his presentation, but we want to hear from all of you as well. So passing it over to Beatriz, what about from yourself and your own experiences? What are some of the common challenges you've seen founders facing when exporting?
Thank you, Nadia, and it's a pleasure to be here. In my opinion, there are quite a few. I know Paul touched, I think he mentioned 6 of them, but I'd like to highlight the main 4 for me, which I'd separated them in 4 main categories: regulatory, logistical, financial, and cultural as well. For the first 2, the regulatory and logistical, I highly recommend, and I believe it's highly recommended, that people interested in exporting always engage with trade agencies, because they can also support a lot on this process in navigating the structure of trade rules, taxes, documentation, requirements, or even understanding local employment laws and tax obligations. So, but the other 2, which are financial and cultural, I like to highlight on the financial piece that startups may face financial risk due to currency fluctuations, because I come from South America, so Brazil, and it's not a stable economy as North America. So there are a lot of changes in that, and you have to be aware of those changes during your whole process, from the planning to the final sales process. And also one of that is like very popular, which is the capital requirements that you should be aware that you, if the startup does have the capital, the appropriate capital to enter that specific market, and sometimes they need to outsource part of their operations or seek specific partnerships and able to manage those costs. And the favorite topic for me, which is the cultural piece, I always focus also on the language and cultural barriers. So when you're operating in international markets, it often involves overcoming those language limitations and cultural differences. So I think it's very important in investing in specific translation services, or even hiring local employees that can help you bridge this gap, because there is a lot of difference when you're entering that market. competition. You're entering a new market. They have already the brands that they're used to. They're dealing with the customer loyalties. So I think that's also a very, very important attention piece. And of course, the basic product compliancy and quality assurance that you have to have. So when you're able to understand all of these and address all of those challenges, also with the ones that Paul mentioned, you're most likely to have a successful international expansion. So that's my take.
I love that. And I love how you bucketed it into those 4 categories and gave it that structure. I know you have a couple other upcoming webinars. One is on funding your export journey. So we'll be sharing about, the types of funding that EDC offers and other types. And we also have one on building your international marketing strategy. So that piece on the cultural and building that kind of catered marketing and sales plan. We do have other webinars and resources where we'll dive into that. So thank you for sharing some of those. I know we touched on both the advantages and the challenges, but now let's say our founders are ready to start exporting. They understand kind of what they're getting into, but they want to understand if they're actually ready to export. So Vanessa, I want to turn to you for this one. How can founders and startups start to understand their export readiness and know if it's the right time to start exporting?
Sure. Hi. So like Beatrice mentioned, when determining if a startup is export ready, it's important to consider if they have adequate financial and human resources to do business abroad. So this looks different for every business and for every sector. In my role, I help companies assess if they are export ready. And to do so, we encourage companies to complete the export quiz on our website. This quiz encourages startups to consider if they are in the right place to start exporting abroad, asking them a series of questions, and provides businesses with a score and suggestions to get on track if they are not yet there. But in general, the right time to start exporting abroad is when you have sufficient financial and human resources, have completed adequate market research, and have created an export plan. Once you have the basics down, there are so many organizations, including Futurepreneur, Startup Canada, and the TCS, that can provide you with additional advice and guidance. On our website, we have a step-by-step guide to exporting. That's a great starting point for determining your export potential and figuring out what the next step should be.
Amazing. I love that. And we do have the link to the quiz that we're going to share in the chat. I was just pulling that up. So we'll share that if you want to take a look and do the quiz yourself for all the attendees. So once people have kind of started to assess their export readiness and they know it's the right time to start exporting, how can they start to evaluate which markets are the right ones to start with? Miriam, maybe I'll turn to you for this one first. How do they go about picking which markets they should start exporting to?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. At the accelerator, we have been able to work with over 260 companies already in these 8 years. And it's always a question where, and how we do the next step. And, the most important part, and I think we have kind of like structure this in a way that you have to question yourself, what is what you are looking for? Are you looking for market size, or are you looking for funding? Because sometimes it will depend. Sometimes companies are looking for more clients and more like expanding client user base basically, and sometimes they are looking more for like, let's see how to get a partner and get some funding around, or maybe a representative in that market, not necessarily me myself trying to have a strong presence there. So when it's kind of market size, then we see which is the market with the most population in that region or that place that you are looking to expand. Because sometimes people have assumptions. For example, many times in my community that is pretty much Latin American based, people go to Miami because it's Miami. And they have family, friends there, but they don't have an economic reason for why. It's more like is an emotional reason, like I have somebody that told me Miami is the place, but it doesn't make any sense for business per se. They don't have a logic there. But when you dig down and you say, oh well, you are going to export to a certain region. Right now, I have to say our accelerator has startups from Asia, South Asia, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. But I'm going to talk about Latin America in particular. I always give this example. It's like you need market size. You have 2 big markets, and you have Mexico and Brazil, dominating those markets. And, you don't try to focus in both. Just pick one, okay? And try to measure what is going to be the big challenge against the big opportunity. Because sometimes I get startups that have told me in the past, hey, I'm going to go to Mexico and Brazil at the same time. Like, no way. One of them is going to eat you alive and you are not going to end up doing anything. Those markets, when it's like a big market and you are deciding for customer base, really, then you have to put your head on the next 2-3 years and focus just in a strategy in one single market in one main city where you think, you will have the main connections and all that. So for this particular part, I always recommend the startups to become very close with a trade commissioner service from Canada, because they are awesome and to provide, information about those new markets. And of course, with EDC as well. And once you kind of, measure your assumptions and you decide, to go ahead, then, focus into a niche market and then expand from there if, things are going well.
I like that. Yeah, making sure that you can know the market size, where the customers are, but also not going too big too quickly, because then it might be overwhelming and that might not also be the best path. I know I also recommend a lot of founders to look into their analytics. So maybe you see that a market size is really big, but you want to make sure that you have customers already established there, so you can see where your website traffic is already coming from. Do you have people coming from Mexico, from Brazil, from UK, US? Where are people already trying to purchase your product from? And maybe that can help guide you when looking at the analytics of where you should expand next. Vanessa, I'm curious from your side too in TCS. I know it's been recommended a lot by all the panelists. How do you go about helping founders understand which markets to expand to next?
Of course. So after you've determined that you're export ready, market research is the next most important step. And this helps you evaluate which markets to start with. So often what we see is companies get a lead from a foreign company or choose a market based on where the competitors are. And this could be a good start, but it's always important to verify if the market truly exists for your product or service. And ideally, if you're looking to export a product, a good place to start is by determining your harmonized system code or your HS code. Once you have your HS code, you can use tools such as Trade Data Online to help determine which markets receive the most Canadian exports of your products. And once you have a general idea, it'd be a good idea to access Tariff Finder to determine which tariffs, if any, apply to your products. You can also see which countries have free trade agreements with Canada to help determine which markets you should focus on. The ones that have lower tariffs are most favored nations, or MFN. You'll see it on the Trade Data website. It's a little trickier with exporting services, as you won't be able to find hard numbers on your service since there's no HS code. So in this case, I recommend looking at the free trade agreements Canada has with different markets and countries to determine which are the most favorable for service providers. For both products and services, it's important to consider the official languages of the markets you are entering, any certifications or permits that are needed to do business in that market, and market competition and the culture and societal norms that dictate how business transactions are completed in that market. At the TCS, we can assist with these considerations as we have over 160 offices over the world with 1,100 trade commissioners on the ground. So they provide the kind of on-ground experience and expertise that businesses really need to start exporting abroad.
I love that. And I know we've been sharing a lot of the resources that you're recommending in the chat, and we also send a follow-up email afterwards. So if you miss any of them to the attendees, don't worry, but you can kind of scroll through the chat and see some of the ones that we've been sharing. So thank you so much for sharing some of those as well. I want to shift gears a bit to talk a bit more about networking. And I know a lot of times on this call already, we've been talking about finding clients and finding the right markets. And, you need to have that cultural piece that we were talking about as well. So I want to dive into some tips for effective networking and building those international relationships that can help you when you're starting to export. And maybe, Megan, we can start with you for this one around your tips.
Yes, for sure. And I think this is probably something Startup Canada is known for as well, but honing your pitch when you do your networking. So really identifying what it is that you want to present to the person that you're talking to, right? And it's not going to be necessarily always your elevator pitch about your company. It could be adaptable depending on the interlocutor